Welcome, guys. Let's talk more about Qigong training. So, the first question is from Riker King. Hi, Riker King. It says, what do you think about Yong Yunyan's, sorry, my Mandarin pronunciation is terrible. What do you think of his second voluntary movements theory? Oh, yeah, he was a famous I Ching master that trained under the founder. Dentist by trade, actually, I think. Second voluntary movements theory. That's a very fancy name for spontaneous movement. He was actually pretty famous for this, coining this, I think it was a student that coined this word in English. Spontaneous movement through post-training. So in each one, when we post-train, at the very basic level, we use imageries to control the body. You hold the ball. The ball is made of paper, depending on the lineage, so you don't use too much strength or the ball breaks. You don't use enough strength, the ball drops. So you want to just use enough muscle to hold the frame and structure of the movement. You latch the band between the fingers. There's a ball floating on the elbows. You're resting on it. The whole point of these imageries is to get your body to do two things in the same time. One, retain a shape or structure through the bones. Two, relax. Because you can't control multiple muscles at the same time, using imageries, a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? So it allows you to do all these things. So I just want to get it out of the way while you're using imageries. So you hold the ball, you imagine that, you hang by a string, relax the spine, stretch out the vertebrae, stretch out the ribs, inflate the body, sit on a chair, imagining you're resting your legs, rooting underneath into the ground, open up the pores, open up the bones, tongue touching the roof of the mouth. So I'm saying a bunch of general mechanics that's extremely popular right now in any course in post-training. I call it the container, right? On a little bit more advanced level, they'll get you to kind of have an expansive feeling in every direction. So now, this is very good because after a while, what happens is the blood starts to get down into your lower center, which is 85% of your immune system. It will sprout, and then your extremities, fingertips and toes, top of the head, it will have a pulsing, powerful feeling. And it's very, very effective. Even within 3 months of consistent post-training, most people with chronic fatigue will report feeling much, much better. To a certain degree, brain fog, definitely when it comes to blood pressure. So, mainly it'll boost your energy to the point where you'll be pretty shocked, especially if you've been sick for a long time. So it's very effective, used a lot in the hospitals in China. The founder of I Ching was a pioneer of this for health practices. So one of his students, what you're asking, Mr. Yong Yunyan, he coined the term second voluntary movement theory, spontaneous movement. What's that all about? It's based on understanding what I just described. If you do it long enough, consistent enough, and relax enough, without you trying at all, you start having spontaneous micro movement as you stand. You might, for some people, you'll start shaking. For other people, it might be balancing movements. It might be tweaking movements, all sorts of different spontaneous movement. The key here being that it's spontaneous. You're not doing it, you're letting it happen. You're not making it happen, but you're not stopping it from happening, and your body starts to have micro movements. A good metaphor usually explained this is when you're boiling something, eventually the lid starts to go like this until it, boom, right? So as your nervous system is balancing itself, as your nervous system is releasing deep tension in the body, of course there's going to be some movements. And these spontaneous movement becomes a symptom of when the healing and balancing properties starting to happen. That's why you can't make it happen. You actually have to post-train long enough until the body's going through that, right? When it's going through that, if you don't interrupt it, if you allow it to happen, all the blockages and deep tensions in the body starts to release. And you're going to feel, well, the first few times it happens, you get this euphoric feeling. And people with spinal problems and joint problems will experience their joints kind of having more space between the bones. They'll experience more energy, euphoria. Some will start seeing a little bit of a bright light behind the optical nerves, like in the brain. And it feels great. You just feel a lot better. You get a lot more energy. So there's a lot of healing properties towards that. So when you ask me what I think of that, that's what I think. And the first time you go through it, actually, if no one told you about it, because you asked this question, obviously you know about it. But a lot of us didn't know about it. My Sifu, when he taught us, he never even bothered talking about it. Because he says if I talk about it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy now is BS. So he just got us to do it. So the first time I experienced it, this kind of pulsing, spontaneous movement in pose training, it kind of freaked me out. But because it felt like my whole body was doing this and shaking, all of a sudden it goes, everything just relaxes. It was euphoria, right? It felt great. But then later on, like maybe 25 years later, when I learned the Heaven Mountain tradition from Master Steve Smith, there's also spontaneous movement, but it's the different type of spontaneous movement that we just talked about in each one. In each one, the spontaneous movement is happening from the inside, where, like I said, something inside your body, your nervous system's balancing itself, and it's starting to release. And it's a very easy type of paradigm to understand. Your body's like this, and it's starting to release. And in the process of that, there's spontaneous movement. Very simple to understand, very natural, right? But the more ancient way of doing pose training, unlike each one, which is around the 1930s and 1940s when it was fully developed, the ancient way of doing pose training before the spiritual aspect of these practices was outlawed and destroyed, there was this idea from sitting practices that the whole point of the Taoist tradition at that time was to merge with the Tao. Not philosophically, but literally, where you sit to the point where your body drops off, they say classically. What that means is you're actually losing spatial awareness and body awareness. Kind of like when you're smoking a lot of marijuana, or you're in deep sleep, or when you're in a flow tank. So you start to forget about your body. That's why one of the nicknames of original Taoist meditation is called Zhou Meng, which means to sit and forget. And forgetting what? Forgetting body, forgetting all forms. So when you forget about your body, your mind is still there in terms of self-image, your personality, and your thoughts. And everyone experiences, right? Also the picture of your own self-image. But if you actually sit long enough, you experience that mental body as literally a field, like a bubble. Very few people will sit past this. But if you sit past that point, that bubble eventually, and you merge. When that happens, you can't describe it. It's just an euphoric, blissful feeling, right? I'm doing a really bad job describing it. Very blissful, very loving, very peaceful. This will start to feel very hot, and it will start to open up. If you sit past that point, something starts to happen in Chinese, which means you don't experience it as energy anymore in the beginning. You don't just experience it as love and bliss anymore. You start to experience it like a presence, like it's alive. A lot of tradition will call it by many, many different names. Buddha nature, emptiness, the Great Spirit, the Godhead, Brahman, the Tao. Different culture and different time in history will give it different name, but they're describing the same idea that this stuff behind matter is alive. What does that have to do with spontaneous movement and post-training is this. When you experience that stuff, and it's coming through you and it's moving you, that type of spontaneous movement is 360 degree different than the first type of spontaneous movement we just talked about in the beginning of this episode. Because in the beginning, the spontaneous movement we talk about from each one is really your nervous system, your body going from here to here. And in the process of releasing, it has spontaneous movement. The second type of spontaneous movement I talk about, which is the most ancient way of training in Taoism, is about you merging and the stuff is coming down to move you. Way more spiritual, and the first time you experience it, you can't even compare the two types of spontaneous movement. The latter being a million times more powerful. I don't even have a word for it. Yeah. So this leads to the second thing I want to talk about today. When people talk about spontaneous movement, post-training, blah, 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 it is very important to research the ancient way because it's a lot more powerful. This being the case, it has a much, much higher chance to heal you. When I experienced the first type of spontaneous movement when I was about 25, 26, it gave me more power, it gave me more energy, and it freaked me out because it was so neat. But when I was really, really sick to the point I almost died when I was 45, that type of spontaneous movement didn't even put a dent in my illness. But the second type of spontaneous movement completely healed me. This is why this paradigm shift is really important. And that's also why we shouldn't stop at the basic level and keep training. Which leads to the second thing I want to talk about, and that is in classical Taoism, there's 4 pillars of practice. There's movement, and then you progress to standing, and from standing, you go into sitting, and from sitting, you go into laying down. And they're for different purpose. When you're moving is really to release the tension in your body and your mind, to still your body and your mind and calm enough that you can finally stand still for a long time. For most people, standing still for a long time is very difficult in the beginning. So slow movement practice is a nice way to get people into the flow state. That explains why 99% of Qigong content on the internet or in books is usually about movement, because most humans don't have the discipline to stand still in the beginning. So, and then a second level is after the movement, you learn post training, you learn to stand still. And the main process of that is just to get this lower center to become more powerful, which is responsible for your physical energy boost, right? Classically speaking, after the post-training stage, after you can stand for about an hour consistently, they introduce you to sitting practice. And earlier, I already walked you through the general concept of sitting. The whole purpose is to merge. So it's working on these 2 centers. So standings for this one, sittings for this one, emotional healing and spirituality merging. Once you can do that, the last type of practice is laying down practice or dream practice, where you set the energetics in such a way that even when you fall asleep, you are practicing. Maybe on another episode, I'll talk a bit about this. The reason why I want to bring this up is, it seems to me in modern times, judging by all the emails and YouTube comments that I see since I started this podcast, because people see the different benefits, movement is really for flow state, standing is really for physical energy boost, sitting is for emotional healing and spirituality, and laying down for dream practice. Of course, if I do a deep dive, there's much more in that. So I'm just making blanket statements right now. Because people are starting to see the 4 different ways of practices for 4 different benefits, one of the common mistakes that I see a lot of people make is that, and they should really avoid this, is to separate the practice. Like, hey man, I'm only looking for physical energy boost. Since it's mainly about standing, I'm going to ignore sitting, ignore laying down practices, and ignore movement practice. Or other people might be like, hey, I'm mentally and physically in good shape. I don't need to stand or sit. I'm only going to work on the movement practice just to get some flow in my life. Or some people would be like, look, I got an emotional problem. I don't want to do that physical standing stuff or the movement stuff. I just want to go right into the sitting practices, and that's all I want to do. Classically, all 4 was taught without choice. It's not a buffet that you can pick and choose. It's very important to do all 4 for a reason, because they plug into each other eventually. Kind of like in martial arts, right? Some people only want to do weapons. Some people only want to do one type of weapon. Some people only want to do empty hands. That's a mistake. Because let's say if you only do blades, and you get pretty good at blades, that's good. But if you were to allow yourself to do sticks, to do baseball bat, to do an axe, to do a screwdriver, to do a wrench, to do an umbrella, to do a sword, to do a short blade, let's say you put like 8 weapons on a table doing the exact same drill. Each one has a different property to it, a different energy to it. Each weapon have a unique characteristics. Every time you pick up a weapon, the same skill transfer to all of them if you're doing the same drill. But in the same time, every single one of them has something that can't be transferred because it's unique. If you train with all these different weapons, what happens is, let's say you have 5 different weapons on a table, you're going to learn 5 different unique lessons. And every time you pick up the next weapon, the lesson you learn from the previous weapon, if you've been training properly, will get plugged into it. In essence, you're going to have 5 new insights and 5 different martial art teachers on the table instead of 1. Whatever you learn in one will naturally plug into the other. It becomes a compression way of learning. This might sound confusing, but it's super important for Qigong practices to escalate your learning curve and make you heal a lot faster. So in the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. I just want to open up the conversation for this. For those that are interested in joining our Taoist community, we have a Qigong course in the website right now. Follow the links below. It comes with a weekly live Qigong class, half guided meditation, and half live Q&A. We also have a free student forum for supportive learning purposes, and also a free student library with all the classes recorded in there. If you're interested, follow the link below. I'll see you there. This Thursday, we're going to be working on walking meditation because I know a lot of you have been asking about it. That's going to be in Thursday's class. All right, guys. See you next time.